Hippo CMS, the content performance platform, takes the guesswork out of digital marketing and makes your content strategy data-driven. You can optimize your online presence by attaching business goals to your content and experiment to see which variants resonate best with your audiences. We built Hippo CMS to empower your IT and marketing teams to respond to evolving online business needs and collaboratively innovate the online customer experience.
Hello, everybody. I'm Butch Stearns.
And I'm Scott Lewer.
And welcome to CMS-Connected, the web content management industry's only news commentary show. We say that every show, but we're the only news commentary show in this space.
And what we also say is that we are the award-winning news commentary show.
Well, I'm not big on the awards, but I will say this. The news and the commentary part, we're going to get into a lot of news that's going on, and we're certainly going to have your comments about everything and anything.
Plenty of those. Always lots of that.
Even Ashley Madison in this episode.
That's right, that's right.
So let's talk about the subject of today's show, the mobile content management shift. How an increasing number of organizations are embracing the mobile movement when faced with managing their sensitive content and information. What's important about this subject? Why do you want to dive into this one today?
Sure. Certainly the mobile shift has always been significant. It's a shift to the notion of the ubiquity of the web, that you can get anything, anywhere, anytime, and that's valid. The notion of mobile content management as a category I don't like because I think it's a little lame, to be honest. It's yet another acronym to make up, but certainly the fact that as a person, as an individual in whatever setting, whether an employee or customer, et cetera, we need to be able to access information on our devices.
All right, that is the subject of today's show. We're glad to have you as a part of today's show. Our guests on today's show, Barbara Mosier-Zink, will be joining us from Digital Tech Diary, and Barbara will be chiming in on the main topic of today's show. We're also going to be joined by Amy Martin from Falcon Software, who's going to be in the Spotlight segment and reviewing Orchestra CMS. And we're going to be joined by Scott Abel in our news segment to comment on one of our news items. But before we begin, I'd like to thank our lead sponsors for CMS Connected. They are the same two lead sponsors they are for every show. They are Falcon Software. Falcon Software is a digital experience agency that can provide you with expert advice and integration solutions for all your creative design, content management, digital marketing, and e-commerce, social, or mobile needs. And by Digital Clarity Group. DCG is a research and advisory firm focused on navigating organizations through the digital transformation process. So let's get right into it with our news stories and our news segments here on CMS Connected. All right, Scott, so let's get right into our top news stories in the CMS industry. You ready? There's a lot going on as usual.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right, let's dive into it. News item number one here in our headline segment of this edition of CMS Connected has to do with commerce vendor acquiring a CMS platform. Whose tail is wagging the dog now in this one, right? Montreal-based Orchestra, pronunciation might not be right, but it's with a K, Montreal-based, a provider of cloud-based multi-channel commerce solutions, and not to be confused with Toronto-based Orchestra CMS, which we'll be reviewing in the Spotlight segment. Orchestra expanded today with the acquisition of Composite, an award-winning Danish open-source content management software vendor. Orchestra plans to integrate the Composite C1 content management system with its commerce orchestration cloud to enhance the personalized e-commerce and in-store shopping experiences it provides to mid to large retailers, grocers, and branded manufacturers. What do you make of this acquisition in particular, Scott?
I think you're right when you talked about the notion of the tail wagging the dog here. It's one of the very few acquisitions that we've seen where the commerce vendor is acquiring the content management company. So I think that's a first, and that's if not the first, one of the first. I also think that it's significant here that you have the acquisition of an open source platform and some of the things that can be done with that. So the notion of that it's frankly a .NET open source platform is kind of unique in and of itself. So this situation is fairly unique all around, but to be honest, it is a continuation of the theme of commerce and content coming together that we've been talking about for so long now.
So we constantly talk about that theme, commerce and content coming together.
Yep.
So I think I know the answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway. This story is about a commerce vendor acquiring a CMS platform, not the other way around.
Correct.
So is this a trend we're going to see now?
You know, it's a good question. I think there are, you know, if you look at who are some of the options that could be some of the larger commerce vendors that are not yet kind of hitched to a content platform, you look at a Demandware, also another SaaS-based in the cloud commerce platform. You could look at, for what was a long time, we know that SAP acquired Hybris, and Hybris still didn't have a CMS platform hitched to it, but I think you'll see very quickly that they'll be making some announcements about a new content play that they have. May not necessarily be an acquisition, but something in the works there. But you know, there could be a trend if Demandware were to go step up to this. Otherwise, might be small little onesie-twosies, ones that people might not be as familiar with. Yeah.
That's news item number 1 on this edition of CMS Connected. Okay, time now for news item number 2 on this edition of CMS Connected. And for this news item, we go to cbronline.com and an article about billion-dollar businesses leading digital content management adoption. This is really about investing in management solutions. And when we look closer at this article, it sort of differentiates between companies that exceed $1 billion in revenue and companies under $1 billion. And when we look at that, both of them show trends that they're investing less in management solutions for digital content, according to analysts from Cable Global ICT Intelligence. So Scott Lewer, what does this article, what does this trend tell you?
Sure. It talks about the spend today versus the spend in the next 2 years and their allocation of budget. I think 2 things. One, which is probably even fairly significant here, which is overall the commoditization of pricing, right? That we're seeing, I've worked with one large software vendor very recently to actually help them lower their prices. They're finding smaller businesses buying the products and they want to make them more available to them. So decrease in pricing, commoditization. Second is the advance there of open source, I think. And so less expensive solutions, people are starting to realize they don't have to spend so much money to get good quality products. I think overall the second thing might be that maybe, I don't know about this for sure, and we'll talk to Scott about this, but maybe they're realizing that the best money spent might be on some of the practice of managing that content more so than on the spend in technology. I don't know.
All right, let's bring in our guest, Scott. As you mentioned, his name is Scott Abel. I'm Bort Stern, Scott Lewer here in studio at the Pulse Network. Scott, let's bring you in. First of all, for people that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're an author, The Intelligent Content, a primer. You're an expert in content strategy. What do you preach when it comes to content?
Well, 2 things. Content is a business asset, and it should be treated just like any other kind of asset, but it's not. We lose it. We rename the places that we store it so that machines and people can't find it again. These kind of behaviors wouldn't happen with money or components in a factory that are made to, assemble together products that we sell. But we don't think of our content in that way, except for there's actually been a movement over the last 10 years for certain types of very complex content, usually by giant companies that are global, to try to find a way to manage it more efficiently. And their goal is to deliver the right pieces of content to the right people at the right time in the right language in the right format on the device of that customer's choosing, right? But then there's this whole difference between a customer and a prospect. So this becomes very complex when you really start to say that you care about your customer, or you care about the relationships you're trying to have between a brand and its consumers. You have to be able to segment the content and deliver the right pieces to the people who are prospects. And not all prospects are the same. So it's a giant complex thing that we are trying to help people understand. So as the content wrangler, my job is to kind of instigate that change.
So Scott, this is Scott Lewer. How are you, bud?
Good, thank you.
Great. So the cynic in me says, so I said there are kind of 2 major things going on here, that either they're spending less on the technology because it kind of is getting cheaper, or 2 is that they're maybe spending less on it because they realize that they should be spending more money and time on the practice of managing the content and on content marketing than on the technology itself. What do you think about the latter? Is the cynic in me right to think that maybe that's not happening? Do you see that happening more? Is this trend finally starting to take place?
I don't know. I say statistics, lies, damn fools, all that. Who knows what these numbers mean, whether they're real, whether they mean anything. But the trends I'm seeing is that companies still buy software. The first question that people ask a content strategist is, what tool can I buy? I can have a giant sign above me that says, don't friggin' ask me about software. They will still ask me about software because we're accustomed to that. So I think that there's probably a trend in trying to shift, if you're a vendor of software products, to a lower tier market. So for example, everybody chases after the Fortune 500. Once there's 2 or 3 competitors and they do fairly well and they have a slice of the market, and that's mainly the market, then who else do they sell to? They have to step down their offerings and offer a smaller one for medium-sized businesses or small businesses. So I think there's maybe a little bit of a focus on that. But amongst companies that recognize their content as a business asset, we see a trend of people starting to think about the content first. Because if they start to focus on the channel first or on the software first, they get preoccupied with that. So everything becomes about that instead of about the content that the consumer actually cares about.
So let's give them then a path from here. Let's say that we're reaching the millions of them that we would like to be able to do so today. And if you were to give them some advice about what should their focus be then? How do they decide to stop focusing on, you can't pay for it, you're not going to get this by buying it, but what should you then focus on from the practice of content management? What should they do?
Well, I think there's 2 things. It depends on your business, right? So let's assume that you're having challenges trying to get the right piece of content to the right person at the right time. Not the right document, but the right actual words, right? However you're communicating them. So you have to start to think about content as a componentized thing. How can I have these small modules of content and mix and match them into different deliverables? And that's really about strategy, right? That you do need tools to facilitate delivery and to do all the magical stuff that tools are much better at. But tools need intelligence, right? We need to give the tools metadata about the content so that they can act on our behalf. And I think we're going to start to see a trend of companies starting to think about content as an asset and then asking more questions about how can we improve the structure of the content? How can we improve its semantic richness so that machines can sort it, filter it, deliver it, reconfigure it, restructure it, so that voice-activated systems could allow us to talk through a voice activation system and go get the right piece of information, right? Not the right file, right? But the answer to the question. So I think there's a big trend toward looking at the content itself.
Good. Now, so last question is kind of, if part of the first answer that I gave, which is that the commoditization maybe of technology and or the advance of open source, I wonder how complex does the technology, what you're talking about in terms of turning content into smaller bits and bytes so that it can be kind of reused and pulled in, that's extremely, I think that's advanced thinking, that's where we should be. We've been talking about it for a long time, but it's rarely done. Does the technology need to advance in order to be able to accommodate that? In other words, if we tend to be looking at kind of the lower end solutions for more of our organizations, even the larger ones, can those support the more complex kind of content management that you were talking about?
And the answer is no.
Right.
There's like 4 or 5 tool vendors that actually make tools that allow you to create componentized content from the get-go. They haven't been jimmy-rigged from 25 years ago, and they're not brand new that take on some totally different approach. But there are authoring tools and component content management systems designed to do exactly what we talk about, deliver the right pieces, right? And reassemble them. And so what's surprising to me is I think software companies, by and large, the bigger ones and the most popular ones, they tend to sell solutions that we think we want to buy. And so I'm trying to advocate that just because we've been doing it this way all the time, right, for the last 25 years, doesn't mean we need to do it the same way. So there's got to be some kind of trade-off in value. What are we going to get for structuring our content so that devices can understand it, so that computers can process it, so that Watson can offer it and marry it with other content, right, and make it more valuable? So there's a giant learning curve. That's the first thing. Second, we have a shortage of talent. So even if the tools were magically to be aware of all this stuff today, we have a shortage of talent. We can't find the right kinds of authors to write structured XML content that systems can understand. And this is frustrating, but there's good news. I just delivered a presentation where I did a lot of research on this at the Content Marketing World. And I learned that there's a class in Mountain View, California, 5th grade, that's teaching their students how to structure content. Now, we can't wait for these 5th graders, right? So I thought, okay, there's got to be more. So I searched the internet. There's an entire group of teachers who recognize that this is a problem. They're not preparing the youth of today for the world they will live in. And so there's an entire Pinterest group dedicated to structured content where elementary school teachers are teaching students this and sharing lessons, because the textbook manufacturers haven't hired writers to create this kind of content yet either, because they don't know this students need to know this. And even at universities, and I lecture sometimes at universities, there's a lack of this kind of knowledge. Wow. So it's going to take a while, I think, to get there. But to say that there isn't a way to do it, it would be ridiculous and untrue, because the companies that are doing it don't want their competitors to know.
Well, Scott, latest evidence that we're not smarter than fifth graders. That's what I took out of that. Hey, final comment, going right back to the article and question from me. Advice from you, again, you're a content expert, but advice on you to big companies that are looking to make the investment. Because one of the things this article says is 74%, nearly 3 out of 4 of higher revenue businesses used web content management solutions, and 63%, more than 3 out of 5, are considering investment in the next 2 years. So again, basic advice for those people before they do this spend.
Yeah, the web is a channel, and if you lock yourself in by designing content for the web, you're going to screw yourself. It's about content. It needs to be future-proof. There's going to be new channels always. You know, we have the device revolution. We're going to have kiosks and public displays. You're going to be able to walk by something, and it's going to trigger the need for content at that location. You can't marry yourself to the web. Oh, and by the way, what about all the people who have hearing and visual disabilities? What about other needs? Like saying that paper doesn't exist, which is kind of what web content management systems sometimes infer, is so crazy because there's paper everywhere. Try going through an airport. You have to scan some stuff. You have to touch a touch screen. They print out a chip with this, a little barcode on it. Then you have to scan it. Then you give it to an officer who gives you a pencil and a piece of paper and asks you to declare some stuff. So content is all over the board. It's the audio we hear. It's the signage that's around us. It's all the information coming from visual sources, and it's the web, right? So I think locking yourself into the web is a dumb idea.
Awesome. Scott Abel, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Time now for news item number 3 in this edition of CMS Connected in our headline segment. And for this news item, we go to an article from Tiffany Elliott from DCD, Digital Clarity Group, that best of breed research and advisory firm that's navigating organizations through the digital transformation process. Do you suffer from service provider afterthought? Your colleague Tiffany wrote a post on this and asked that question boldly. What's the focus of all this, Scott?
Sure. The emphasis is on where it should be in this article. What she points out is that so many times, and we've done this on this show, Butch, where we talk about technology as being the thing, that's what's going to make the difference. And oftentimes, digital strategies, et cetera, they do not succeed nor fail on the technology alone. And so her point here is that many of these companies, she's trying to say, do not have service provider afterthought syndrome. So many people are trying to find the exact perfect technology that's just right for them, and they forget all about the fact that they've got to go find somebody to help them implement that. And oftentimes, it's that selection which is far more material to their success or failure.
So by the way, you know how much we love acronyms on this show and in the space?
Don't
SPATs.
do it.
No, if we're trying to diagnose companies that have this, they have service provider afterthought syndrome. It's SPATs. So here's the question for you. What are the symptoms for companies that have SPATs? How do they know? How should they self-assess whether they might have SPATs or not?
Sure.
Check their pulse? What?
Yeah, no, I think the biggest primary, first of all, SPATs is actually fairly decent. I'm going to give you a little bit of credit for that. But you know, I think that the most common one is that you will find them chasing one technology to the next. So they're constantly throwing out the baby with the bathwater and saying, you know, XYZ vendor's name is no longer. It's mud. Its name is mud now within the organization, and all of a sudden they're going to shift from that platform to the next one. So you see that a lot. They're constantly doing these technology selections every 3-4 years, et cetera.
All right, news item number 4 on this edition of CMS Connected. In our headline segment, we go to CMS Wire, and we talk about Forrester launching a new ECM wave. Your friend, Cheryl McKinnon, analyst at Forrester, puts this out and says, though some IT managers may choose a single ECM platform solution provider or solution to cover all use cases, Forrester splits its ECM wave now to help decision makers make choices according to their specific needs. And when it comes to selecting an ECM vendor for business content services, there's a plethora of choices. First of all, Scott, what is Cheryl talking about here with business content services? How do you differentiate that from transactional?
Sure. First of all, when it comes to enterprise content management, there are not many people who know more than Cheryl does. So I respect her opinion greatly on this. She's talking about the difference between transactional content, enterprise content management, and business services. Is that the idea is that transactional content is for content that tends to originate outside of the enterprise. So think in the idea of an insurance company that is dealing with a lot of paperwork that's being scanned in and that sort of stuff. So it's a lot of content that's brought into the organization, as opposed to business content services is more about managing content that originates within the organization. So through the course of projects or that sort of stuff, we're creating material and it's then about managing those pieces of content.
So Scott, Cheryl mentions 9 of the 11 who merited mention in the Forrester Wave as winning recognition as leaders, and the remaining 2 as strong performers. The remaining 2, iManage and Spring CM. But the leaders, the 9 of 11 she mentions, IBM, EMC, Box, Microsoft, OpenText, M-Files, Alfresco, Lexmark, and Everteam. What's the distinction in your mind that Cheryl's pointing out here between the 9 leaders and the other 2 strong performers?
So I think the most important point there is that, frankly, that there are 9 out of the 11 of them are leaders, and 2 of them are strong performers, meaning you can't make a bad choice here, is what I think this is essentially saying. I think that's a little bit too bad, because I'd like to see a little bit more differentiation. Maybe we have to change the criteria slightly to show these, but these tools are extremely different. If you look at what an EMC offers versus what a Box offers, they're pretty far between. We talk about some of those companies that have regulated environments and things like that, where enterprise content management is like the basis of their business, and it's not just merely kind of making content available to folks, but it's rather putting it through significant processes. I think Box is going to fall short in something like that. So the fact that they've risen here to a leader is certainly great news. A Box and M-Files, other ones that you haven't necessarily seen play as strongly here. I guess we're basically saying that all of them are doing really well now, and their features and functions are coming along. I would, however, like to see a little bit more differentiation, Bush, because ultimately what waves are supposed to do is help people make decisions, right? Ultimately. And the devil's in the details here. If you're comparing Box to EMC and really saying that these 2 solutions stack up one next to the other, when one is nearly a freemium service that's available, yes, certainly you can buy an enterprise license to it, and the other one is a huge implementation. I would like to see a little bit more differentiation there.
All right, time for news item number 5. And as we go to news item number 5 on this edition of CMS-Connected, watch closely to see just how much my co-host squirms as we bring up Ashley Madison. Me, on the other hand, with my squeaky clean background, have nothing to worry about. So, what does Ashley Madison have to do with the CMS space? We're still trying to figure that out, but we're going to tackle this anyway. It comes from an article from Fortune.com, Scott, about Ashley Madison and that whole story, and about users of Ashley Madison, which you might be one, who knows, suing Amazon and GoDaddy for $3 million.
Yeah.
So let's get this straight. According to this article, Fortune.com, users from Ashley Madison are suing Amazon and GoDaddy for $3 million. The basis of the lawsuit claims that Amazon and GoDaddy are partly responsible for the fallout from the huge data breach. And 3 users of the adultery site claim that Amazon and GoDaddy are to blame for receiving stolen property and infliction of emotional distress. The allegations stem from the fact that these companies host websites where people can pay to search the millions of names released in the last month's data breach. The first obvious question, do they have a case here?
Right. So my non-attorney opinion here, and also non-involved person as it relates to these matters, is, no, look, I could see if Amazon or if GoDaddy were actually hosting the ashleymadison.com site, and that part of the breach or the hack essentially was due to some security lapse in their capabilities. Certainly that might be something where now the lawsuit's possible. In a case like this, what you're basically saying is they're going to be sued for content that sits on them. And I don't think that we've ever seen that, certainly ever before. In fact, I think we've seen that thrown out before by the courts in previous cases. So no, I don't think that they have much of a case here. I think it's three guys who go by the name of John Doe, who, by the way, are only looking for $3 million. Are they trying to like get under the wire? Because that's fairly small amount of money if you're suing a GoDaddy and an Amazon. I feel like they could just like, write a check out for that tomorrow.
Well, a final comment on this. Again, this is from an article on fortune.com, and one of the lines they have I find interesting here, and I'm curious on your reaction. Accusing them, Amazon and GoDaddy, of wrongdoing in this case is like blaming the power company for an offensive neon sign.
Yeah, you know what? I think that's a fairly valid analogy. I didn't think so at first because I thought maybe this had a little bit more substance, and this was a suit of the hosting companies that got breached. In fact, though, yeah, it's right. It is like suing the power company for the creation of a neon sign. I think that's a fairly valid thing, which is why it's going to be bogus and thrown out.
You didn't squirm as much as I thought you would on the Ashley Madison story.
Listen, if we were talking about... No,
I'm listening.
Okay, never mind.
I'm listening.
We're good.
Scott Lewer, Butch Stearns, that is our headline news segments on this edition of CMS Connected. Back with more right after this as we talk about the mobile content management shift. And we'll dive into that with our special guest right after this.
Your job is to cut through the noise. To succeed, you need to reach out to your target audiences in real time with messages that speak to them. You can't let technology get in the way of your brand. That's the spirit. First Spirit is a powerful solution that helps you effectively communicate and engage with your target audience. Get an awesome ROI. Success in the market means your message got through to the right people at the right time in the right way. And that's why you need First Spirit. Get started with digital marketing. Visit www.espirit.com now.
Welcome back to CMS Connected. I'm Butch Stearns.
And I'm Scott Lewer.
And we're here, Scott, for the meat of our show today.
Yeah.
Mobile content management shift. Now, of course, the CMS industry needs more acronyms, so I'm going to throw some at you.
Yeah.
Okay? As BYOD becomes a problem for EMM, will MCM help with MDM? So let me explain. Mobile content management, as we all know, is an emerging trend that enterprises need to grow and manage closely to ensure enterprise security and user productivity. In layman's terms, people more and more bringing their own devices to work.
Yeah.
Business is done that way, but it causes problems for companies, right? Security, compliance, all of this. So as we're talking about enterprise mobile management, EMM, and we're talking about the security policies that go around that, mobile content management tools, MCM, become more important than ever, don't they?
Maybe. I'm not sure that I love the mobile content management term as one. I certainly agree.
So you disagree with the premise that we don't need more acronyms in CMS, the CMS space?
No, I really don't want to see any more acronyms, but I also think that mobile content management is just, as a category, bogus. I think it is just, there is content management. It surfaces on the web, and people will read it on their mobile devices, certainly. The EMM category, the enterprise mobile management, that has to do with the fact that you've got a whole lot of devices out there that you got to figure out how to manage, and that makes an awful lot of sense. It's not necessarily the web content that's showing up on them, though.
All right, I'll tell you what. Let's use another acronym, BMZ here, and let's bring in our thought leader expert for this segment. Her name is Barbara Mosier-Zink. She is from Digital Tech Diary. She is clearly a thought leader in this space. Barbara, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. For people that don't know about you, Barb, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
I have a background in architecture, RT architecture. I worked for over 10 years as an architect, helping design applications with a specialty in web-based systems. And I left the consulting business and went on my own and started writing about and talking about all these topics that I had such an interest in, everything from web content management to enterprise collaboration and everything that falls in between. And so now I have my own website that I write about these topics on, Digital Tech Diary, and I also do a fair amount of content and product marketing for clients in this industry.
Excellent. Let's tap into your expertise and your passion, and let me ask you a follow-up right on that. This subject, mobile content management, are you passionate about it, and if so, why?
Well, I think, to be honest, I have the same feelings that Scott does in terms of I don't understand what mobile content management means. When I think of that term, I think it's web content management delivering across for mobile devices. But that's not what this category talks about. This category talks about people in the enterprise that want to work off-site, and they want access to all those documents and files that they have to use to create their work, and they want to be able to create their work manually off-site and get it back into the enterprise easily. That's content management. That's more about file sharing than it is about, mobile content management. It's file sharing across any device or any channel that you need access to.
So, Scott, while you and Barb both agree that we don't need more acronyms, that you don't like the term, you do both agree, though, that this is what's going on in the industry. This is how business is being done now. There is a need to solve these problems when people are using their own devices and working on the go.
100%. And frankly, whether it's working on the go or whether working even at their desk, I mean, it's not necessarily, they used to talk about the information and the content that you'd be able to get to from your mobile device was far more limited than what you would necessarily see in a desktop view. While the real estate is smaller, certainly, I think, though, that what happens here is still people want to be able to do everything they can do on their desktop, but on their mobile device. And whether that is, as a matter of fact, here on my way to the studio today, I mean, I was literally sending out to a huge, email group of people and doing all kinds of stuff on a full site that I needed to be able to do on my mobile device, and just because I was on the run. Secondly, though, even if I'm sitting at my desk, whether it's now we're talking about use of iPads or whether it was talking about whatever it might be, I think people are needing to be able to access kind of full service capabilities. And like Barb makes a point, is it's not just, I said earlier at the top, which just to kind of clarify, I said earlier that it's kind of web content management on any device. Like she's talking about, it's any sort of content management. So it's files and it's everything else. So yeah, for sure.
It's different that it's not just I want to get files or access to content on my tablet. It's I want to get it on my smartphone or my tablet or my laptop. I want to get it if I'm sitting on a train going home from work, or if I'm sitting on an airplane, or if I'm on a client site trying to get to work with a client, or if I'm at home in front of my TV at night. So it could be any amount of devices a person wants access to, and they always want that content to be synchronized across those devices, and they want access to it all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, Barb, I guess my first question to you then is, if we set this up and we kind of take a step back, we both disagreed with the terms and we didn't like them, but certainly as Butch points out, there is a circumstance within the enterprise that this has made things more challenging. Is that right? I mean, talk about it from from IT's perspective, in terms of the fact that there are so many devices that it's not something that's necessarily company issued. What kind of problems does this present for an organization in terms of managing that, and how are they dealing with this?
Yeah. So the biggest problem is people are taking those files off-site in any manner that they can do it. And that's a huge security risk, because you're talking about companies, financial institutions, insurance institutions, anybody that has secure content that's private and has to worry about all those kind of security restrictions. They don't necessarily want their content being taken off-site onto someone's personal device. But at the same time, an employee doesn't want a BlackBerry for work and an iPhone for their personal use. You don't want to be carrying around 5 or 6 different devices. You want to be able to use the device you have in your personal life and use it for work. And a lot of organizations aren't issuing devices anymore. They're letting people bring their devices to work and use those devices. So now they have to think, it's not so much, it's important to think about the devices themselves and how they're being used, but it's even more critical to think, how is that information being stored on that device? Can people who aren't that employee get access to it? What happens if that device gets stolen or, picked up by someone and that information's not secure? So it's the security of the information now that's becoming much more important. And those are the features and the functionalities that these organizations have to think about.
So Barb, let's go beyond security, because clearly security is vital, and it's almost to check the box. You have to do that before anything else. But let's go to the social component of it. As we all know, business is done on the devices of our choices. And like you said, we're not carrying around multiple devices. And if we are, they're used for personal and for professional. So those silos are broken down. So when it comes to the social component of all of this, and as companies turn to mobile-first strategies, what's important for them to consider?
Well, first of all, I don't think any company should think mobile first. I think they should just think information anywhere, anytime, whether that's mobile or not mobile. But they have to think about how that information is getting to that person and how they're being able to use it when they're not in the corporate office. And they have to think about all the information in the corporate office is not on one single repository. It could be across a wide range of repositories, and you need to be able to track who's taking that information, when are they taking it, what is it being used for, and what devices is it being put on. So it's a whole range of stuff that they have to think about. And they have to think that the person who uses this information isn't just reading this, they're making changes to it, they're working with other people, because you don't work on projects as a single person. You work with groups, so you need to share the information, share updated versions of documents, create new documents, edit together, collaborate together, and all of that stuff has to be thought about today when you're thinking about people going off site and working.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. What do you think has enabled us so far? I mean, I actually think that it's the cloud that's really helped us to get there. What do you think has got, so first of all, you had this demand by employees where for a long time your employer gave you the best device that you had in your house, and then now you're bringing that yourself. But is it the cloud that's gotten us to this stage? Because I do find that we can do an awful lot now on our mobile devices, but it seems fairly recently that that's the case. Is the shift to the cloud the thing that's done it for us, and what do you see as kind of the future? What's the next step?
Well, it's definitely the shift to the cloud has helped. When you have all those consumer-based, or what started at least as consumer-based tools like Box and Dropbox, where you can get stuff out there and get access to it whenever you want, wherever you want, all that stuff, all that consumer technology has really pushed the business to think in new terms. And you probably have heard the term shadow IT, where people were starting to just, and they probably still are. I don't think that, and most organizations have been able to wrap their heads really tightly around how to manage this. But people will come in and they'll use their own devices. They'll use these cloud applications to get content out of the office. And that's just driving the big concern that organizations need to manage things more. Where it's headed in the future, there's some interesting things out there about where, serving mobile content or content to users in the enterprise is going to go. And one of the ones I thought was kind of interesting, and I think we're so very far away from it, is the idea of providing the content within context. So if you have a meeting coming up that you're going to be working on a particular project with a group of people, your content management system will automatically know to go pull the most recent versions of all the documents that are related to that meeting. That was kind of a fun one, an interesting one, and it would be really cool to see it happen, but I think we're a ways away from that.
You are watching CMS-Connected here from the Pulse Network studios. I'm Butch Stern. Scott Lewer is alongside. Scott, we're talking the mobile content management shift, what it means for companies, what it means for the tools you need to deal with all of this. We're joined by Barb Mosher-Zink from Digital Tech Diary. What are the other concerns here? What aren't we addressing when it comes to this?
I'd love to, first of all, I like the point that Barb was just talking about the whole kind of in-context stuff. I'm starting to see that happen an awful lot more. Even when you go look for an address now, it'll quickly, you start to go type into Google search for an address, you start to type in the number 1, and it knows that on your calendar that day, you're supposed to be going to 12 Kennedy Lane, it fills that in after just putting in like 1 or 2 characters. So already you're starting to see your calendar and your device come together. So we're seeing that happen.
Another buzz term that goes on, especially with enterprise level companies, contextual marketing.
Yeah.
More and more, it's not about marketing the right way. More and more, it is about marketing the right way, how people and where people are to get to them. Yeah.
You know, I think the other, I'd love to, you asked, your question was, is kind of what are we not covering here? And I'd love to find out if Barb has some thoughts about what some of those industries, Barb, are doing that you mentioned at the top of this. We talked about security. So Barb, you talked earlier about some of the security concerns with maybe regulated businesses and those that have kind of more higher concerns as it relates to their content and having it get into the wrong hands. Insurance, financial services, pharmaceuticals, et cetera. How are they overcoming this hump? Are they enabling their workforce to be mobile?
They don't have a choice. I mean, there are so many different people that work off-site in those industries, agents that go to customers or their client sites to deal with different things. They have to enable this functionality. Mobile device management is a technology that lets them do that. It gives them a centralized control of all the devices that are being used in the organization, and it gives them the ability to control what content is being shared on those devices and how it's encrypted on those devices and how they can clean it off those devices if something happens.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think, you know, at the top of that makes a lot of sense because I think those industries are the ones that you do see a lot of the need for that. If you think in pharmaceutical, you've got sales reps out there in physicians' offices, that sort of thing. So certainly they do need to overcome that hump. I'll ask you another question. So we talked at the top where we both agreed that mobile content management maybe isn't the most appropriate term because it's really just a flavor of content management. But we do see, if we're talking about on the vendor side, which is one of the questions as it relates to content management on mobile devices, we're talking about it from the kind of the end consumer's perspective, the employee's perspective, et cetera. How about though on the management of that content front? And so I certainly do see some vendors making even web content management tools more able to be managed more easily from mobile devices themselves. Do you see this happening? Is that a trend out there where they're allowing that to happen more and more?
Absolutely. I mean, there are vendors in the market that are purely they're called EMM vendors. So like AirWatch and Mobile RN, they're two kind of standalone technologies providers that do mobile device management, but they also offer these secure content libraries where the content can be stored and accessed. But there's probably not very many enterprise content management vendors who aren't looking at this and trying to figure out how to incorporate it into their enterprise content management suites. IBM is the biggest one doing that right now with their whole mobile first suite of products. They offer all that capability. And the ones that don't will hook up with an established mobile device management vendor so that there are products that enable people to share content and collaborate on content remotely are securely managed through those technologies.
Barb, let's shift, if you will, to some advice for people. You said, I thought, very succinctly off the top, that it's not really about mobile content management, it's about web content management on mobile devices. And I think that's very well said. So advice for people, advice for companies when thinking about that, when thinking about the right tools to deal with that. Where do you begin? Where does your thought process begin?
So it depends. If you're talking about web content management and mobile devices, which is completely different than what we're talking about here, that's the ability to manage content, whether you work in the office or off-site, and you need that. I don't believe that there are any editors, content editors, or authors or reviewers that don't need that functionality, and you'd want to make sure that your web content management provider offers that capability built into their systems, and a lot of them do. But on the other side, you want to know that your company offers file sharing and collaboration tools, and that those tools are accessible outside of the office, and that those tools are accessible in a secure way so that you're not just using Dropbox or Box on the consumer side, but you're using box on hooked up to a mobile device management system, and then your content is secure as you work with it. If you don't have, if your service provider isn't giving you that functionality, I would look for someone else, because anyone who's not providing that today is crazy.
Yeah, and Scott and Barb, you know, we work with OpenText here at the Pulse Network, and they're a leader in the industry when it comes to DAM. And really, this is what we're leading up to, is digital asset management and managing those assets and some of the things you're doing. I guess the question I have for both of you is sort of the term customer-centric. I mean, really, when I think about all of these things, the best-of-breed companies, to me, start with a customer-centric approach. You can look at all the tools and all the fancy add-ons and all the things you want to do, but if it's not good for your customers, if you're not starting by thinking about what's important to your customers, then it's the wrong spend, it's the wrong mentality, it's the wrong, can be the wrong shift within your organization, can it?
I think you're right, and I'll add on to that, that it's not just the customers, but in this case, much of the time we're talking about it's for the employees as well, right? So whoever is that end user, yes, it is about them and what they're doing, and how can you help them be able to do whatever they need to do more effectively, more efficiently in their native environment. And more, that native environment is on some sort of a mobile device. So I think you're spot on there.
So Barb, how about you just to comment on that from a customer-centric approach? For the companies that you write about, do most of them have that in common?
Absolutely. The customer for the enterprise is, first of all, the employee in this case. And you have to think about how they're working. A lot of companies are forcing people to work outside of a 9-to-5 window. They don't give you cubicles in the office anymore. You can work at home. There's more flexibility in how you work and when you work, as long as you get your work done. So they have to enable users, their employees, to do that. So they have to understand which employees are doing it, why they're doing it, and how they can make that easier for them. So when they offer these tools, they can't just offer you anything. They have to offer you something that's very easy to use, very user-friendly, is easier to use than going out and using a consumer-based cloud app that you might have already, and that offers you more functionality than those applications do.
I think you're spot on with that last point. That's really important, that it's the consumer-focused trend that's driving the enterprise to be that much better. And frankly, there is an alternative for much of what you can get done in terms of, for an employee. You can use your employer's software and things that are needed, or you can go outside of that. And I think that's one of the biggest threats to the organization, is that, right? Where, like you were talking about earlier, that employees will essentially go off the ranch, off the reservation, and do what they want, and they'll take your content with it, and then you've lost control.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep. Good.
So Barb, let's finish with a final comment about the future, the crystal ball, if you will. If you're looking into this now, again, I'm curious, because you're out there and writing about so many different angles of this. What have you seen of the companies that are doing it right? What have you seen in the industry when it comes to, I know you both don't like the term, but mobile content management done right, so to speak, or what is the future?
It's a new wave of enterprise collaboration, is what I would call it. So, I mean, enterprise collaboration has been around for a number of years, but organizations have to think more and more about how to allow their employees to work and collaborate together, no matter where they are. And that's where these tools have to ultimately go. It's not about the device anymore. It's about how to work on that information and share that information whenever you need to. So it's definitely about a new look at how to collaborate better and more easily together. And I think that's where you'll start to see more of the solutions evolve, more social collaboration, collaboration regardless.
Barb, thanks for your time, and I'd be remiss without mentioning the background that you have there, the high-tech designs that you have, clearly from the Mosher Zink family, that have done a phenomenal job over your head, right?
My kids are all artists, yes.
Barb, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barb.
All right, Barb Mosher Zink, weighing in on mobile content management. Good conversation.
Yeah, no, she's good. And that's a fun topic. I think, that's something that, regardless of what you do for a living, whether you're even interested in content management or not, this subject affects you.
All right, you are watching CMS Connected. Scott Lee, we're Butch Stearns. We're back with more after this.
So you've got a great website. Your marketing team spends hours driving visitors to it and nurturing them into leads. And your sales team spends hours collecting, qualifying, organizing, and chasing those leads. Sales wants to focus on what they do best. Selling, and marketing wants to get on with what they do best, creating innovative campaigns. But how do you make both teams happy? The solution is marketing automation.
Welcome back to CMS-Connected, the web content management industry's only news commentary show. I'm Butch Stearns. Time now for our Spotlight segment, where we review different companies, and we're going to review open source user experience platform vendor Orchestra CMS. They are the first and only enterprise-class web content management system built 100% native on the Salesforce.com platform. Founded in 2009 by CEO Doug Gervin and Stantive Technologies. And joining us to review Orchestra CMS here in the Spotlight segment is Amy Martin from Falcon Software. Hello, Amy. How are you?
I'm good, Butch. How are you?
Great to have you here. So let's jump right into it, Amy. Who is Orchestra CMS and what are they all about?
Yes, definitely. I'd love to tell you more about the company. So Orchestra CMS, they're fully owned and operated by Stantive Technologies, who is a web development company who opened their doors back in 1992. And they really started Orchestra CMS in 2009. Doug Gervin, the CEO, and their team, they really wanted to put everything together from their experience. They had 20 years of experience. So they really thought as a core question, if we could start from scratch and if we could apply all the knowledge and experience that we thought of in the last 20 years and really apply the latest technologies of Salesforce, as they had been a partner already for 7 years, what exactly would that web CMS look like? So it first all started with Salesforce. They released these sites, is what they were called, and they were API and developer tools. And it allowed people or their developers to put content on static web pages. And so it was just, that is how Orchestra started. They started on top of these sites. And since then, they have totally expanded. And their footprint is way beyond that. So definitely, when they first started, they just saw this amazing opportunity to have a web CMS built entirely on a CRM platform. So Doug Gervin, called it bringing CMS in from the cold.
Amy, what's their sweet spot? What kind of industries does Orchestra CMS cater to?
Yeah, so in the last 5 years, they've really landed in their markets very organically. They really have landed in 3 different markets. The first being the pharma life science markets, the second being the financial services markets, and the third being retail. And the first 2 really share a lot of the same areas. They both deal a lot with security and compliance issues. And when Stantive Technologies first started, or over the years, they really focused on microsystems that had a strong pedigree with security and compliance issues. So they really excelled in those 2 areas, and that's probably why they landed in those 2 markets very naturally. And then looking at retail, Salesforce has this amazing scale and ease of use with very robust intranet. So if you think of these retail stores and the amount of turnover they go through and the tremendous cost associated with it, and keeping their staff up to date, they really need to tell their staff about products, new products, specials, training. So it's a big problem that retail goes through. And Orchestra saw this amazing opportunity to really step in, provide a communication and collaboration vehicle for these retailers.
This is our In the Spotlight segment on this edition of CMS Connected. I'm Butch Stearns. Amy Martin of Falcon Software is joining us. And in this segment today, we're reviewing Orchestra CMS. And Amy, let's talk about who are some of the intranet competitors for Orchestra CMS. And would you say that Orchestra is becoming successful in the intranet market?
Right, for sure. Yeah, just to touch on their competitors right now in that intranet space. Definitely right now they're looking at Microsoft as being their biggest competitor. And that's just because every enterprise that deals with Microsoft deals with SharePoint. That's just kind of how it works. And to look at some of their other competitors, it would definitely be LifeRay to a lesser extent, Jaya a little bit, as well as Adobe and IBM. And then to answer the second part of your question, they're absolutely becoming very successful in this social intranet space. If you look at where they started 5 years ago, a lot of their business was coming in as mainly just portal business. And now it's pretty much split half and half between portal and intranet. So they're definitely taking hold of this opportunity, and as well as their competitors, as this is a great time to work more in the intranet space.
So Amy, you've told us about their intranet competitors. Who would you say are their overall biggest competitors? And when it comes to giving us some more insight into Orchestra CMS, what do you think are the 3 biggest differentiating factors that they have or that they claim to have?
Yeah, so looking at their biggest overall competitors, if you're looking at the North American space, they really have expanded in Canada and Australia, and now looking at expanding in Europe. But if you just look at the North America space, they really have their overall competitors are Adobe. And mainly that's just because they've been around for so long. They've been around forever, and that's, people have grown up using Adobe. Their next ones are definitely Sitecore, Oracle, IBM. Looking at the bank areas, they kind of dominate in this portal sector. So those are definitely their biggest competitors. And if you're looking at their biggest differentiating factors, the ones that definitely really stand out, because they are natively 100% built on the Salesforce platform, this gives them amazing advantage in a lot of areas. So number one, being that there's no integration, being that they are a web CMS built with a CRM, there's no integration. So that saves everyone so much time. Looking at number two, it's the elimination of content management for IT. So if you look at one of their biggest intranet clients, they have 1.5 million users, and it's strictly run on a business unit, no IT involved. So it's huge. That's about 130,000 pieces of content that are sitting in their library, run strictly entirely by a business unit. So no IT involved, and a lot of their competitors wouldn't be able to say they'd be able to do that. So that gives them another huge advantage. And then the last one is the personalization side of things. They really take a holistic approach when it comes to the user's experience. They get to watch the user's experience and then really integrate sales and marketing in real time. So it makes it so much more efficient and makes them ahead of the game.
So Amy, let's do the crystal ball question. Great insight into Orchestra CMS. What type of growth do they hope to see? And take us in the market 3 years from now. What type of growth do you think we'll see from Orchestra CMS?
Yes. Okay. So looking at where they're at right now, they have about 75 employees in offices in Australia and Canada. They are wanting to be expanding into Europe into the first quarter of 2016. They also deal a lot with organizations that are in the Fortune 500 class. And right now they're into the triple-digit growth. So their main goal of where they want to be going is to be expanding offices in the US and in Europe. They want to be accelerating growth and be well into that triple-digit growth, into that place. So they also really want to be having to continue that amazing relationship they have right now with Salesforce. They've built up a great bond with each other, and Orchestra is now really acting on an engineer level, and they're really wanting to expose some of the content management into the community cloud. And this is a phenomenal new market for them. So it's really exciting times ahead for them.
This has been our In the Spotlight segment on this edition of CMS Connected, as Amy Martin from Falcon Software reviews Orchestra CMS. Amy, great information. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on the show.
All right, and if you would like to get a hold of Amy, look at the information on the bottom of your screen. I'm Butch Stearns. More of CMS Connected right after this.
People CMS, the content performance platform, takes the guesswork out of digital marketing and makes your content strategy data-driven. You can optimize your online presence by attaching business goals to your content and experiment to see which variants resonate best with your audiences. We built Hippo CMS to empower your IT and marketing teams to respond to evolving online business needs and collaboratively innovate the online customer experience.
All right, welcome back to CMS Connected. Time now for our CMS Insider segment, and there you are, our CMS Insider right there.
That's right, here I am.
Are you ready?
Insider, yes, I am ready.
All right, let's dive
Always,
into this. And we're
always
going to
ready.
talk in this Insider segment specifically about Gartner's Magic Quadrant for 2015 and get some more insight into it for WCM.
Yeah.
So 3 vendors who weren't there 9 months ago cracked the leaders category of Gartner's Magic Quadrant for WCM. It was released in July, and the newbies in the leaders category include OpenText, SDL, and EpiServer. The returning leaders included Adobe, Sitecore, Oracle, IBM, HP, and Acquia. The big news in the leaders group may be Sitecore's leap over Adobe and its ability to execute, right? Adobe edged out Sitecore in the last Gartner report, but Sitecore grabbed the top spot for the first time. So Scott, other than the leader newbies and Sitecore and Adobe jockeying, what are your key takeaways from this latest report?
Sure. We've talked about this before, but just to go back to the kind of the basics of the quadrant here is that number one is on the vertical axis, you have the ability to execute, which is essentially the size of the organization. How easily can they get out into the market? The number two, the second axis is the completeness of vision, which is essentially whether or not Gartner sees that the strategy of the particular vendor is in line with their own or not for the future of contemporary web content management. So I think one of the first things that you talk about here, Butch, when you look at this is that you don't see any more vendors in that upper left quadrant anymore, what's called the challengers quadrant. They've either fallen or they've moved over into the leaders category. I think, first of all, the ones that have moved over, it was mentioned by you in the outset, was SDL and OpenText move over into the leaders category, so congratulations to them. The one that's interesting to me, though, is that we saw the way that Gartner handled the Microsoft news is that they dropped them down into the niche player.
Well, we've talked about this a lot before when we come up with Gartner, and you've made the point that Microsoft probably shouldn't even be on here. Forrester has taken them off. Why are they on here, according to Gartner?
Yeah. Gartner doesn't say why they're on there, but I'll tell you why I think that Gartner leaves them on there is because, to be honest with you, Gartner's just not thinking about this appropriately. I have a feeling that they are looking at what's out in the market today, and they're saying that certainly Microsoft is still a player out in the market because they are at a fairly large install base still. To the news that we're referencing is that Microsoft, 6 months ago or so, said that they are no longer in the web content management business. They basically have pulled themselves out of that. So I don't understand whatsoever how we can still leave them on a quadrant which is supposed to, in name, has been said that it is for shortlisting products. So, but basically by leaving it on there, Gartner is saying you should consider them. Because frankly, a move into the niche quadrant, let's be really clear, while vendors don't love to be listed as a niche down that lower left, there's no bad place to be. All that it means is that, in fact, they are niche products, that they are not necessarily for everyone. And so what they're basically saying, though, is that Microsoft would be a good choice for someone. And it's not, because they're out of that business. So, if anything, then their completeness of vision has got to be should be all the way to the absolute far left, considering that they basically have said that their vision is not in the web content management space.
Let's finish up with 2 points here. So again, This is about Gartner's Magic Quadrant for WCM and all the points you just made. Here's the first question or thought I'd like to hear from you. Here we are heading into Q4. This came out in July. The significance of it for these players, for the 3 that leaped into the leaders category, or for the ones that haven't, heading towards to the next Magic Quadrant that'll come out next July, right? What's the significance of it timing-wise heading into Q4 here now?
For all of the vendors, to be really clear, for all of the vendors, I mean, there is no question, as much as I despise, to be honest, these plot graphs, there is no question that they are highly influential in terms of people making decisions within large organizations. And so the 3 vendors that we talked about, we said SDL and OpenText moved over, EpiServer also moved up. So those are the 3 wins. Certainly, there's a lot of attention paid into who who's leaders. But all of these guys, the other new entrants as well. Progress Software acquired Telerik Sitefinity, and they're new on the quadrant. Also, Hippo is new on the quadrant. These things this is highly influential. It's in front of so many people in terms of them creating their short list and long list of software companies to look at. So specifically the timing that you mentioned, as we're moving into that fourth quarter where there's an awful lot of these projects getting started up for new money spend in Q1, I think that this is, it's a huge time, it's a big impact, and maybe that's why they came out with 2 this year, to have had one just less than a year ago, and then to have the next one now. They came out pretty close together.
All right, and the final point is about new entrants into this. Again, you mentioned that this is influential, so people are probably chomping at the gate, trying to get into this and get noticed about it. What about new entrants?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the Progress Software is new on this. Hippo is also new on this.